You've got content, but you know what? You don't have a content fuel framework. And we are here to fix that with the awesome and amazing Melanie Deziel. Welcome to the show, Melanie.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to chat.
So I know that you have this fantastic book, Content Fuel Framework. We're also going to spend some time talking about the latest and greatest, which is Prove It. But even before we get to all that good stuff, give us just a quick sketch of your professional journey that brought you to the work that you're doing today
Yeah.
and some interesting pit stops along the way.
It's my journey is quite winding. So it's nice. I like that you talk about pit stops because it feels very much like it was a chaotic road trip with some pit stops, right? I studied journalism. I always thought I was going to end up in a newsroom, at a TV station, something like that, uncovering injustice and embezzlement and things like that. But that's not the way the economy or the industry went. And so I found myself with all these skills of how to talk to people, how to find information, how to create content on deadline, how to take feedback from many different editors and find the happy medium. And I realized that could be useful in a marketing context. And so that's kind of how I accidentally found my way into the world of content marketing. I started at the Huffington Post, where I helped build out their content team. Their paid content team. So not the editorial stuff, but the stuff that we were creating on behalf of our marketers or on behalf of our advertisers and partners. I was the first ever editor of branded content at the New York Times and helped build Brand Studio, which was a very similar team, kind of creating content on behalf of advertisers. I played a very similar role for the 35 US magazines that were owned by Time Inc. Before I set out on my own to do a lot of this same work. So I've taught in a college setting. I have written 2 books, as you mentioned. I've done a bunch of consulting and speaking and really just focused my efforts on how can I share those things that I learned about how to connect with audiences through content with folks who may not have had that same background.
So tell us a little bit. And so this is, am I right that you are also a guru in what's known as native advertising?
Yes. Yeah.
So native advertising, in case people do not know, this is not about Native Americans and, things on the
No,
reservation.
no.
Tell us about what that is and how it works and how that sort of informed your worldview.
It's so funny you say that because when I first got into native advertising, my title was Native Ad Product Manager. And I explained this to my grandmother, my grandfather's wife, who at the time they were living on the Cherokee Reservation in Oklahoma, and they were like, "We're so proud, this legacy and all." And I was like, "I'm so sorry to disappoint you. I'm just doing advertising." But native. If you think about it, there's a reason that those things sound so similar. It's because native advertising is focused on creating advertising that feels like it belongs in a place, like it is organic, that it is endemic, that it thrives most in that specific place. So if you think about when you're on Twitter, like a native ad on Twitter is going to be a tweet because that's the content you expect to see on Twitter, right? So my job in HuffPost at the New York Times and with these magazines at Time Inc. was to figure out what would be native to this environment. And those environments were very different. I like to joke that when I was at HuffPost, we created some really fun content, but it was mostly lighthearted, really quick and easy to consume. So I worked with Charmin, for example, and we did like 15 things to do while you're on the toilet or something. And it was like, organize your files on your phone, catch up on email, things like that. And then going over to the New York Times, we did this massive investigative piece for Netflix show Orange is the New Black about what it's really like to be a woman in the American prison system. So both equally valid, both native advertising, right? Both were sponsored, clearly labeled. But the difference is what's native to the Huffington Post is lists and humor and lighthearted content that's quick and easy to consume. And what's native to the New York Times is in-depth, multi-format, reporting on current social issues, with real sources. So it's not that one is better or worse than the other. It's that they were native to different environments. And so that's always been a fun challenge for me. And I think even though I'm not working in sponsored content in that way anymore, like I'm not at a publisher helping brands figure out how to create content natively, I feel like so much of marketing and advertising is sort of native advertising. Like if you sprinkle it down, like if you get down to the roots, you're trying to figure out the most organic way to reach people in a particular environment. And so I feel like I use those same skills all the time and take that same approach to new platforms or, new partnerships. It's a lot of the same stuff.
Very cool. Very cool. And you're sort of let's face it. I mean, people need to know you're sort of a big deal in that world. Am I right?
I've taken some airport selfies after conferences.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Well, I got to tell you, content fuel framework, I would say ideas per square inch in a printed book. And I have the printed book here. I'm not doing the Kindle thing, but literally ideas and value per square inch, probably the highest score of any book I have ever read. And I've read a lot of books. So tell us a little bit about the genesis of the content fuel framework, because it is lists, it is structure, it is brainstorming, it is a ton of examples. It is so thorough and so rich. It's like a dense, flourless chocolate cake. So tell us a little bit about how you collated, curated, and collected these into book format. And then how, I'm also curious, then we'll talk a little bit later about how that was received and what kind of feedback you're getting and all that good stuff.
Well, first things first, I need to go update the Amazon description to like a flourless chocolate cake, a dense flourless chocolate cake.
Totally.
That's amazing. Love it. But it really came out of necessity, like that same journalistic instinct that I was talking about earlier. I was speaking at conferences, doing corporate workshops. And what I realized is that so many of the folks I was working with, if they didn't come from a journalism background, they saw coming up with content ideas as this difficult thing. I'm not creative. It's not for me. Like, I don't know how to do it. I don't know where to start. And in a weird way, like that perspective had never occurred to me, because in journalism, we're taught that stories are everywhere, not that they're a scarce resource. Like there's always something that you could be looking at, a new perspective, a new approach, someone new to talk to. So it was interesting to me. And I had to sit back and really think, like, what am I doing in my brain when I'm coming? How can I teach this process? Because it was so unconscious for me. It was just like automatic. So what I realized is that my brain essentially had the matrix that you see in the book, like this 10 by 10 framework, although it's not always just 10 by 10, but it's this matrix where I say, okay, now what are the different approaches, the focuses I could take in telling this story? And then once I have clarity on what I'm going to focus on, what are the different ways I could bring that to life? So that's really where the structure came from, is that it was a lot of inner work, a lot of like doodling and brainstorming, trying to figure out what's happening in my head when I'm coming up with ideas quickly. And that was really what it came down to, is that we're trying to think of one thing when it's actually two things. It's a focus and a format.
Yes. And again, just to kind of cherry pick a couple of things.
Yeah.
The focuses, and this is for folks like us, right?
Sure.
Thought leaders, experts, coaches, consultants, speakers, people that I call entrepreneurs of our expertise.
Yeah.
There is so much to tap into, but until you break it down, it's almost like it's so amorphous that unless you have some kind of taxonomy or you actually kind of break it down, okay, what are the 10 types of content that I could put out, and that's the 10 focuses.
Yeah.
And then what are the 10 formats in which those might live? And obviously some people love writing and some people hate writing, and some people love video and some people hate video.
Right.
And some people, love, graphics and Canva and memes, and some people hate graphics and Canva and memes.
Right.
So it's not do everything all the time.
Yeah.
But for professional experts who are selling our expertise, where would you recommend that they start with the focuses? And then talk a little bit about what you're noticing just as far as trends in the formats.
So on the focus side, again, the book lists out a whole bunch, gives you lots of examples. But I think people is one of the easiest places to start. And the reason for that is like we know what people are. Those are easy enough to find. Sometimes we're the people. We could make content about us. We could make content about our customers, our employees, our colleagues, our partners, our community. Like there's lots of people you could talk to and create content about. So even just that small prompt of saying, if I focus on people, what are the stories I could tell? It kind of sets your brain in that direction to search for people focused stories. And so people is often a really good place to start. The other one I love is instructional content. So if you're educating your audience, you're giving them, DIYs, recipes, how-tos, that kind of stuff is so, so valuable to an audience. And if you are selling your expertise, then that probably comes easy to you. You already know what you know how to do. So it's pretty easy to just put it down into some form. As far as the formats, and, there's the important thing about formats, and I always tell people this, is I don't care so much personally if you're using this framework that you pick one or the other. It's really more so to think about all the different options, because like you said, we all tend to gravitate toward our favorite. So I'm going to pick writing every single day of the week for everything that's an option, because that's my sweet spot. That's my first content language. That's where I thrive. That's what's native for me, right? So it's helpful to think of these other formats, because you could be robbing a good story of the chance to be great if it were presented in the correct format. So writing is often the most accessible for people, because like we all went to school, we all text, we all write emails. Like on some level, if we're blessed enough to be literate, then we're able to go ahead and create written content fairly easily and quickly. But I do encourage people to really stretch and think about ways to create content that you haven't considered before. Those are at some of the formats at the end of the book. Things like a quiz, I think, is a really fun stretch creatively to think, okay, how could I test my audience's knowledge about something? Or how can I help them figure out which bucket they fall into, which tier they should be in, which product they should buy? I think that's a really nice approach. That's not only super valuable for your audience, but again, kind of stretches your brain to think of presenting your ideas, your knowledge in a different way.
For sure, for sure. Well, I'm also thinking just from a sales standpoint, a quiz is a fabulous tool in revealing gaps, right? It's like, oh, I'm a 9 in this area, I'm a 10 over here, but oops, I'm only a 3 over here. Maybe I need Melanie's help with whatever this 3 area is. And then that could be a lead generator. That could be the beginning of a sales conversation. That could go lots of places.
Exactly. Well, and you can also, I mean, it's a way to serve up additional content as well. So, if you're maybe them getting a 3 in one particular area isn't actually a service you offer, but you do have an ebook, or you have other blog posts, or a podcast episode, or a video where you could say, hey, it looks like you could use some more information about determining XYZ. Here's a guide I wrote on how to determine XYZ. It's a way to kind of keep people engaged and serve them up more content. But, as you said, it's also a really great way to qualify your leads too. If folks are coming in and you already know a baseline of, hey, I took the quiz and it said that I'm a fresh starter. And you're like, okay, well, that means we need our basic package. That's where you got to start. It's a great way to get more information before that sales conversation.
Really, really great. Before we move on to Prove It, which is equally awesome, if not more so, although it's not quite the flourless chocolate cake. This is more like just it's a nice bundt cake, very, very delicious. And it has some Phil Jones icing, which we'll talk about later. But what was the surprising feedback or surprising reception that you got from the Content Fuel framework? Obviously, it's a great book. I'm just going to say that 17 more times. It's a great book. People need to buy it. They need to read it. They need to follow you. But what were some ahas? Because obviously, as an author, we have a very clear intention of putting this piece of work, this body of work, out into the marketplace. I'm curious, when you're speaking at conferences, when you're doing your programs, what feedback has come back to you that's like, oh, I never knew people were using it that way?
Well, it's funny because we're going to get into it, but I feel like the biggest question I got after people read Content Fuel Framework was, well, now that I have all these ideas, how do I decide which ones to create? How do I prioritize that list, which is kind of, what brought us to Prove It. But I think the best thing for me, to be honest, was seeing photos of people's books like marked up as a resource. So they were flagging pages or highlighting things or jotting notes down, sliding an article into a certain page to save as a reference. And, when you create a book, I think for the most part, you assume like that's a thing that's going to sit on a shelf and maybe get referenced from time to time. But for me, like as a creator, like to see people so deeply engaged and like really interacting with the work was a major lesson for me. And that's where we ended up creating a workbook so that people could do exactly that. They could, read the prompts and write in the margins. And it was really interesting to see that people wanted to go deeper than just, the words on a page.
For sure. So let's change gears. I want to talk about Prove It. And Prove It, I'm going to read the subtitle, Exactly How Modern Marketers Earn Trust. And this is really about, it's about testimonials on steroids, right? It's about how do you prove that you're the real deal? You as a company, you as a consulting firm, you as a coach, you as a speaker. Talk a little bit about this whole concept of trust and proof and what light bulbs were going off in your mind when you said the world needs this book, because testimonials, they can be random. You don't know what to put in them. You don't know how to collect them. And it's almost like a content fuel framework for social proof or for building trust with an audience who doesn't know you or love you yet.
I love that. I hadn't thought of them as sisters in that way, but I like it. But yeah, exactly. So when people are creating this content, again, that question comes up of like, well, what do I create first, or how do I know which are the good ones? And so for me, it was, well, you need to sit down and look at who are you telling your audience that you are? What are the claims that you are making? What are the promises that you're making? And how can you go ahead and create content that proves that it's the truth? Because the reality is, as for better or for worse, we're in one of the most skeptical consumer environments we have ever experienced. There is so much spam out there. There is so many people who are misleading our audience. There's so many, snake oil salesmen. There's, you've got like the Nigerian lottery in your inbox. You've got the car warranty calls coming from all over the place. They have reason to be skeptical. And so the onus is really on us to make that case. And so that's kind of the framework of how that book was approached. Is if we imagine like our brand is on trial, so to speak, like our people want to know what's the truth, what's the verdict on these claims that you're making. And so it's on us to like assemble the right witnesses and get the right evidence and really build that case that we're telling the truth. We're someone you can trust. And content, I think, is just one of the best ways to share the stories of those witnesses, to document all the things that actually happen as they happen, and then to educate the audience and bring in experts who can help them learn about things they might not otherwise know about.
And I don't remember, is social proof one of the categories in the framework?
So witnesses is one of the categories.
Witnesses.
We call it witnesses, right? And those are essentially people who can speak to what it is that you're saying. And so that could be, your clients or customers. You're corroborating your content, right? You're corroborating it. And the witnesses could be your clients, your customers, your employees, whoever can validate, like, I have experienced the result that has been promised. Like
Yeah.
someone else is saying it other than you, right? But you can also corroborate with experts. So if I'm telling you that this is the most efficient way to learn this skill, well, here's, a doctor who has studied this for 20 years who's agreeing that this is a great modality for learning this particular skill. Or, if I'm selling you, I don't know, nutritional programming of some kind. Well, here's a nutritionist, here's a fitness expert, here's an athlete that, has experienced this kind of stuff and can come at it not as one of my customers, not as one of my clients, but as someone who knows this area really well and can back me up and give the stamp of approval, like, yep, they're telling the truth. That's true.
Right. Well, I'm curious because this also kind of crosses over into native advertising, right?
Yeah.
So there's a big difference between a paid spokesperson, and that's why when you see on video, it has to say legally,
Yeah.
it has to say this is a paid spokesperson. So that right away, it's like, well, that's advertising. That's not really
Sure.
proof. That's like they're paying this doctor, hey, here's $5,000. Say that our diet pills are great.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that expert validation if no money changes hands, or how
Yeah.
that typically would work.
For sure. So if the kind of proof that you are creating happens to be paid content, if you're making a commercial or you're making, you're doing an event, then you may very well need to pay the experts. And, just to continue the analogy here, sometimes experts are paid to testify in court for their expertise, right? So
Yeah.
there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. But oftentimes in your content, if you find the right experts who truly believe, and if you are, telling the truth, it's easy for them to agree with you and it's on brand for them. So, great example. I always recommend people look to academia, as the first place you look for experts, because if you think of professors and researchers and teachers, they have chosen objectively the least paying version of whatever they studied because they care deeply about teaching people about it. So if you are to ask them, hey, can you share, we're working on an article, we're working on a video, would you be open to sharing your experience of, common mistakes people make, or what's most important to know when you're starting out with such and such, or, whatever the case may be that you need them to weigh in on, you're not asking them to talk about your brand. You're not asking them to endorse your product. You're asking them to testify that the things you are saying are accurate, and that may or may not have anything to do with your specific product, but it just speaks to the fact that other people agree with what you're saying.
For sure. Well, let's go through just very briefly the 5 different types of claims and sort of a little mind-sparking examples of how they work in the real world.
Yeah, so we break, I don't know if you can tell, I like systems. I like organizing information. I joke that I've always pictured my head as like a filing cabinet. So I'm very organized in where information has to go. And so again, like a framework here is, I think, the easiest way to remember these things. So we talk about 5 different types of claims that your business may be making, again, to trigger your memory to think these are the kinds, this is where I see myself in those types of claims. One of the first ones that we see probably most often in more of a physical product space is convenience. People are selling that it's fast, it's easy, it integrates with other things well. It's, free returns, right? Like they're really just trying to sell you this is a simple and easy thing. So when you think about how am I promising convenience to my customers, that can come to light in, surely the copy of your ads, but it could also be the policy, your policy for returns, your policy for, for extending your work with someone, right? There's lots of places where you can find those kinds of things. Is it difficult to unsubscribe from your email list? Have you made it super difficult? Because that's not convenient. Like you're not following through on the promise, right? You can kind of see that come to life in a lot of different ways. Convenience, I think, is probably the most common in physical goods, but for folks who are selling their expertise or their knowledge, they're infopreneurs, so to speak. I think we see competence as probably one of the most common types of claims. This is where you're claiming essentially that like you're going to do what you say you're going to do, right? Like that I can build that strategy. I can help you achieve those results. I can, deliver on the promise of this book title or this podcast or whatever it is you're building. And that I think is easy to justify with things like testimonials, like we talked about, because in those cases, people who have experienced your results firsthand are often the best way for you to demonstrate, the results that you create.
Yeah, for sure. And as I'm reading through the 5, and again, just for completeness, I'm going to read out what the 5 are. Convenience, comparability, commitment, connection, and competence. What occurred to me, Melanie, is this is great for social proof. This is great for marketing and sales content, but you could almost reverse engineer your offer. So this would be a great way to say, well, what are the components of the offer that people might be doubtful, resistant, skeptical, and how can I hit these 5 notes so that it melts away the resistance and it's a very compelling offer because you've sort of struck these 5 chords before ever asking for money.
Yeah, 100%. Sometimes a question that has come up with folks who are looking at Prove It Early is, do I have to have all of these claims? Like, do I need all of them? And I mean, sure, it's a great way to reassure your customers on those variables that they care about. But not every brand, every company, every individual needs to focus on all of those. For example, do you care very deeply about the competence of the particular person who sells you a roll of tinfoil?
Probably not.
Not like it's tinfoil. It's like it's gonna rip or it's gonna work, and the price point is so low that you're willing to take the risk on a store brand because it's $2, and if it doesn't work, I'll get a different brand next time, right? So if a tinfoil company were spending boatloads of money, trying to prove how competent they are at creating tinfoil, like that's probably not the best use of funds. In that case, you probably want to pitch something like convenience, affordability, um, ease of use. Like those are the kinds of things you'd want to focus on. But again, for those of us who are, selling our knowledge and our experience, you do want to focus on a larger number of those: the competence, the comparability, especially if you're up against particular competition or you're in a really, noisy space, and connection and commitment. And I think are equally important depending on the kind of work that you do. So for example, I know a speaker who speaks on sustainability and how to kind of make your organization, their processes more sustainable. It would be pretty important if you were working with this person to understand their commitment to that topic. If you see them using, disposable plates and cups, that might give you kind of a vibe like, well, are you actually committed to this, or are you just profiting off of it, right? Are you pandering to me? So, commitment when you are selling based on values is especially important.
And I guess that also flows over into social mission and contribution to the community and
Yeah.
things like certified B corporations and all those things where they're now making a very specific commitment for what they believe in and what they support financially. And 5% of our profits go to building wells in Africa and things like that.
Where's the proof? I want to see the wells. I want to see the map of where you're building them. I want to see someone drinking the delicious water that comes out, right? Because it's really easy to say that you are building wells in Africa. Who's going to check up, right? It's really easy to say that you care about gender equality in, pay in your workforce, but where's the numbers? It's easy to say that you support that it's Black History Month and you care deeply about that, or it's Pride Month and you care deeply about that. But people are savvy, they're skeptical, it's easy to say those things and people want to see the proof.
Yes. Well, I want to kind of jump one level out because you had a co-author on this one, Phil Jones, who we've had on the show before, and he's going to come back and do some more stuff. But what is it about Phil? Is it the accent? Is it the hair? I mean, what's going on? So tell us a little bit about how you and Phil work together, because of course he's the exactly what to say guy. And there's little sidebars throughout the key parts of the book that Phil contributed. Talk a little bit about how that partnership in the writing happened, and then what secret sauce he added to the mix.
Yeah. So Phil and I have been friends. We kind of are in the same speaker space. He's more sales and business. I'm more marketing, but there's a lot of overlap in terms of the speakers who float between those worlds. And so we have a lot of shared friends. We are in the same associations. And we became friends, years back. And we would often have conversations about sort of the overlap. You can't help but talk. We're both passionate about the work that we do. So it inevitably, turns to work. And we had this realization, 2-3 years ago that, his work of exactly what to say and the content work that I'm doing, like there's a clear overlap there in like exactly what to say in your content, essentially, right? Like how do you craft content that is the right thing to earn your customers' trust, to build the relationship, to retain them, engage them. And so that conversation in many ways is kind of the evolution of how the framework as it is exists. And it's because we talked through, well, what are the things that people would want to prove? And there were a lot of conversations about what those pillars might be. So we worked together really on the concept of Prove It. I wrote the book and then we worked together to have Phil come in and add. He has these sections at the end of the chapters that's sort of like tying it more closely back to sales and adding next steps, things to consider, questions to ask yourself. So it really is a bit of a 1-2 punch. Like I'm coming in talking about the content and where it fits in your strategy. And then you've got Phil as this expert sales advisor telling you what to do next. And I think it kind of worked. It was a really good partnership, both of us bringing kind of like our best strengths to the work.
It's so funny that you mentioned about marketing and sales overlap, because I think a lot of people would pick up Prove It as a marketing book. I read it really as a sales book.
Yeah.
because when we're in a sales situation, can you tell me a story of a similar customer who
Mm-hmm.
came to you with a similar problem? Yes, I can.
Mm-hmm.
Can you share case studies, videos, interviews of people who are like the people that you'd like to sell to, saying, this was amazing, here's where I started, here's where company X came in, and here's where we ended up, this amazing outcome, we solved the problem, we got the result. So talk a little bit, Melanie, about if salespeople or consultants or coaches or people who sell their own expertise, if they were to get this book, which they will, and they should, and they need, what ideas would you hope in a sales context they can use some of the content ideas around the trust building content that you recommend to them, improve it?
Yeah, so one of the formats of content that you could create is, of course, audio, like verbal content. This is going to happen when you're in an in-person pitch, a phone pitch, a Zoom call. I think what you'll find is that you do have inspiration for almost those bits that you could create. That when someone is doubting this particular aspect, or when someone has this particular kind of concern, I now know that I need to tell a story in this way, or of this type, or I need to include these data points. So I think it can really help inform your sales scripts, or at least your responses to, commonly occurring questions and issues. My hope is that it will help you identify some that you haven't gotten yet. Because, I mean, Phil says it all the time. The worst time to think about what you're going to say is exactly when you need to say it. So hopefully, as you're going through this and you think, okay, well, no one's ever asked me about our commitment to this particular thing before, but it would be good for me to have in my pocket a story or an expert quote or a statistic that can back up this particular issue. So if you can anticipate some of those, I think that's going to be a stellar outcome. But I also think that, one of my goals is I hope that this brings sales and marketing teams together, because I think in many, many cases, we think we're doing two different things with the same goal, right? But in reality, we're so much more connected than we often act like. And I think if sales can be more proactive in identifying the kind of content that would help them in sales enablement, and marketing can be more aware of the kind of objections that our sales team is getting, I mean, the marriage of those two things, of the perfect content to answer the toughest questions, I think that's really where the magic lies.
I love that. Absolutely. Well, talk a little bit about what are your hopes for the Prove It book? Is it about more sales conferences? Is it about building some additional services around the Prove It framework? What's next in the Melanie Empire now that Prove It is soon to be in lots of people's hands?
Well, I've accidentally become addicted to writing books, so I'm pretty sure I'll have to start working on another one, because this was just such an awesome experience. So that's more on the personal side. What I'm really looking forward to is taking an audience-led approach to what comes next. I think that's kind of in keeping with my own values and the way that this work came to be. I am hearing already things from the audience that would be helpful, things like a claims audit to kind of help them walk through and identify specific claims they are making to help them do this, some sort of scoring system to know how good the proof is for particular claims. So I'm loving hearing from people what it is that they need. Because of course, like I said, my instinct, I could make a blog about people who prove it. We have People Who Prove It is the website for the book as well. We could do that. I don't know that would help people, right? I don't yet know that. We could make a podcast and talk to people who prove it. I don't yet know that would help people. So what I'm really trying to do is listen as well as I can, so that we can then go back and create the kind of assets and tools and content that's gonna support them on their journey to proving it.
I love that. Just a quick PS, as far as podcasts that actually help people, forget about it. There's no podcast that actually help people anywhere. I can't think of even one. I can't think of even one, my friend. So give up on that idea. That's not, it sure isn't here. I'll tell you that. It sure isn't here.
I don't think a podcast would be my go-to. But I'm writing to the core, but I also know that not everybody is. So,
Right.
we'll follow their lead.
That's funny. I love it. Well, two final questions as we're going to wrap up. My final question is, how do people get connected and stay connected to more Melanie Deziel brilliance? And we'll get to that in a moment. Second to last question, if folks were to take one overarching idea today about their content, about building trust with their content, about just handling their content in a more systematic way. Like you said, the brain that works like file folders and computer files being pulled left and right and
Yeah.
matrices and grids. What would you encourage folks to have as that overall takeaway concept from our chat today?
I think we have, in the past, sales and marketing kind of taken trust for granted. We've assumed that our audience will just trust us. If we just say that we're good, they'll be like, all right, that's all I needed to hear. So as depressing as it might seem, the takeaway I want you to remember is that your audience does not trust you, and it is your job to make them trust you. I think if you take that ownership of that, and it becomes your mission to build that proof, to build the evidence, to earn that trust, it's going to have such transformative, impacts across sales, across marketing, across customer retention and engagement. Knowing and waking up every day and knowing, okay, how can I make my audience trust me today?
It's so funny that you say that, because one of the things that I've recommended for years is you need indisputable points of proof. And people would say, Newman, what is that? And how do I make that happen? I'm like, I don't know. But now I know it's by Melanie's book. That's how you build indisputable points of proof, and that's how you can prove it. So, Melanie, Deziel, how do people get connected and stay connected to more of your awesome sauce? Gifts, resources, links, where can we send them? What can we put in their hands?
Yeah, so if you head over to storyfuel.co, so that's storyfuel.co, that is my home base. So you'll find information about all my books there, speaking stuff that I'm doing, shows like this that I'm speaking on, and you'll also find some resources that I put together. So as promised, there's some written resources that you'll find there. There's guides, there's checklists, there's all kinds of stuff. But I mentioned earlier that we had that companion workbook for the Content Fuel framework. So what we're going to do, we'll have all this in the show notes. We're going to get a discount code set up for your listeners so that they can go and check that out. And we'll have all the links on how they can do that in the show notes, I'm sure. Would love to see some of the amazing ideas that are coming in from your listeners.
Tremendous. And are you wanting folks to connect on LinkedIn, or you have a social media platform of choice?
I'm going to be real with you. My LinkedIn is probably the spammiest, least trusting place to try to reach me. I know. I just find that I get a lot of unsolicited pitches, right? People who are not reading the context, pitching me things that don't apply to me. So I have a tendency, stuff can get lost in the inbox there.
Yeah.
You can still add me. We'll be friends, but I might miss your message. If you want to reach me, I spend most of my time on Twitter. So I'm on Twitter as mdeziel. So you can go find me over there. And the good news is I'm all over the place. So if you search for Melanie Deziel on your platform of choice, you'll find me.
Melanie, you are like Visa everywhere you want to be. Everywhere you want to be. Thank you so much for being with us. This was tremendously helpful. You're a rock star, and I appreciate you.
Thank you for letting me share my story.